Hello YouTube and welcome to my channel. My name is K.A Bloch and I am the award-winning author of 4 books based on poetry and prose. I also have a website which is the same as this channel called The Practical Poet. That is at thepracticalpoet.com, where I have a blog and then also links to all of my books. So I'm so glad that you're with me. My intent with my channel is to try to bring a more kind of like common sense, modern day approach to poetry. I know that sometimes poetry can be a little bit intimidating, and sometimes we tend to stay away from it or maybe even avoid it because we're not always sure that we're going to understand it. And so I just try to kind of bring a little bit more storytelling through my poetry with maybe just a little bit more of like a modern day spin to it. So speaking of storytelling, so I watched, I'm actually a very new YouTube channel. This is my 3rd video, so please forgive me. It will get better. But when I was watching all of the videos of people that were encouraging those of us of a certain age, and that would be over 40, to get out there and get our channels going, one of the things that they really kept talking about was the fact that after a certain age, we have a lot of life experience and we have a lot of stories to tell. And that was one of the things that prompted me to start this channel was I do have a lot of stories to tell. And the way that I tend to tell my stories is through my writing, through my poetry. All of my poems, or I shouldn't say all, most of them do tell some kind of a story. They're a little bit longer than the average poem may be. Especially like these days, there's a lot of like Insta poetry out there that's just a couple of lines. That's not me. Mine is definitely a little bit longer verse, and I usually tell some kind of a story through my poetry. And then another thing that makes my books a little bit unique is I've never really seen this done in any other poetry book before. But before I get into each poem in my book, I tell a little story about, not a story, but like a synopsis of the poem that includes the motivation, a little bit of the inspiration, kind of how the poem came to be, how I decided to write about that particular subject. And a lot of people really have gotten me really great feedback on that. And I'm gonna approach this channel as well. So my intent is to do a weekly poetry reading. And before I get into the poetry reading, I will give an overview of, what the poem is, why I focused on it for that week, and why I decided to feature that particular poem. So with that, I'd like to get into the poem that I'm going to feature this week. Before I do that, though, quick sip of tea. So good. So the poem that I'm featuring this week is from my 2nd book called Scatter Seeds of Kindness, inspirational poems and short stories about life, love, and the things that shape our souls. And in this book, there is one of the earliest poems in the book is a poem that's called The Bully. And the reason that I chose to focus on that poem this week is because last week on, I believe it was October 9th, was National Bully Awareness Day. And that's one of those days that it's very important, but we also should not need a special day to focus on bullying, right? To stop bullying. That should really be on top of mind pretty much every day. It's kind of like in my house when they have National like Hug Your Cat Day. That happens every hour on the hour. I don't need a special day for that. And I kind of feel like some of these days we really should be focusing on that kind of thing every day. So this was actually a story that happened to me many years ago. As I mentioned, I'm in that above 40 crowd. As a matter of fact, speaking of 40, we just had my 40th high school reunion. So that tells you about how long ago this story happened. It did happen when I was about a junior or senior in high school. I can't remember exactly which grade I was in, but I was a little bit older when this happened to me. And this is a very raw and very personal story. It's a story that I never really intended on telling anybody. After I got out of high school, I kind of tucked it way back into my memory bank and didn't really think about it, tried not to focus on it, tried to move on with my life. And, this was a story that I never really planned on telling. But one day when I was actually getting together the stories and the poems for Scatter Seeds of Kindness, I actually had a flash, kind of like a flashcard in my head. and it had 2 words on it. And those 2 words were the bully. And I instantly knew what they were referring to, what those 2 words were referring to. I don't know who they came from, divine intervention. I'm not sure. I get a lot of my inspiration for poems and stories that way, with just a flash of just a couple of words or a verse of a poem or something like that. And then I know that there's a story to be told there. So I started thinking about that experience that happened to me. And again, I knew that there was a story there. I did not know how I was going to tell that story. But as per usual, whenever I have a story to tell, I revert back to my poems and I find a way in my own style to make it rhyme and to tell that story. So I'd like to feature that for you today as part of my weekly poetry reading. But before I get into the poem, we talk about bullying. And for me, I say that it was bullying, but the truth of the matter is it was more like name calling. I just had somebody in high school that just focused on me, decided to call me a horrible name. And, every chance that he got, every time I would walk by him, he would make fun of me. He would stand up loudly and yell, like, here she comes. And he would call me this horrible name. And I know a lot of kids out there, especially like school just started, which is another reason I thought of focusing on this. Like, not recently, but within the last month or so, school started again. And I know that there's a lot of kids that are going through a lot worse than I went through. And maybe somehow through this video or through my message, and when they hear this story, maybe it'll bring them some peace and comfort. I mean, that's all that I can hope for with my writing. Like the title says, maybe find something that helps to shape our souls. So, with my bullying story, like I mentioned, I wasn't really physically bullied. I wasn't shoved into lockers and I wasn't beat up like some kids are, and my heart goes out to them. But, you know, I was called a horrible name at a time in my life when I was becoming a young adult. And as we become young adults, we start to shape who we're going to become as we step out into the world, whether or not we're going to go out into college or go out into the job market. We're starting to kind of put together what we're gonna present to the world, and we're starting to build a little bit of that confidence. We're almost ready to step out of high school and start to take on the next step. And then you have somebody that comes along and they label you and they tell you that you're ugly and that you're too ugly to live and that you're too ugly to exist, and they give you a horrible name. And you start to shrink away and you start to think that, are they right? Does the whole world see me this way? And if so, I'm just going to cower in the corner and I'm not going to show my face to the world. And so we go back to that childhood uh, phrase, or that childhood chant, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never harm me. But words do harm, right? They can hurt us, and they can cause us to change direction and to rethink who we are and who we're going to become, and what kind of face that we want to present to the world. So that was one of the things that, luckily I wasn't physically bullied, but the name calling, sometimes, I'm not going to say it's worse, but it's not anything to be glossed over either. So one thing that I also wanted to mention with this video is that, luckily, most of the time the bullying does come to an end. Either the school year ends or the bully moves on to, unfortunately, another victim, or sometimes, ideally, the person that is being victimized finds their voice and they stand up to the bully, and they really put them in their place. There's actually a poem in my latest book called So Seas of Wisdom, and that poem is called Finding Our Voice, and it's about a young girl who was bullied a few years ago, and she witnesses another young girl being bullied, and she stands up to the bully, and they both kind of watch him shrink and walk away. So when I get around to featuring that as my weekly poetry reading, I'll link it back to this, because the two do kind of go hand in hand. But eventually the bullying does end. And in my case, this bullying story had a very tragic ending, which doesn't typically happen. It happened to the bully's family, something that happened to them. And I knew as soon as I heard what had happened that um, the bullying was probably not going to be top on his mind anymore, and that the bullying had probably come to an end for me in a very tragic way. So I'll get into that in just a moment. But the the first thought that I had when I heard what happened to the bully story was, is this karma? And did karma step in here? And do bad people have bad things happen to them? And I instantly knew, no, this was not karma. And if it was karma, you went a little bit too far, because nobody really deserves what happened to the bully's family. And even though it ended my bullying story, for him, it was probably just the beginning of a lot of pain in his life. And for that, I am sympathetic or empathetic. I'm not sure, but I do feel for him and his family. So without further ado, let me go ahead and read the poem, and then I'll share just a little bit more of my thoughts on the experience and the outcome and what I learned as a result of this. So again, I'm going to go ahead and put these on. Pardon me if I stumble a little bit. Reading is hard. I may stumble over a word or two, but again, this is the poem called "The Bully," and from my second book, Scatter Seeds of Kindness. And again, my name, K.A Bloch, down here at the bottom. So throughout my youth and teenage years, I lived in the same town. I had my small core group of friends. We'd see other kids around. Everyone seemed to get along, as well as most kids do. If there were bullies lurking around the school, I guess I never knew. Then one day, in my junior year, a new kid came to school. He took up with the popular kids and thought he was so cool. One day in the classroom, he turned around to see me sitting in the back of class, the beast, he nicknamed me. From that day on, when we would pass in the hallway or the yard, "There goes the beast," he'd loudly say. It started to hit hard. I'd hang my head when he approached so he wouldn't notice me. I prayed each night that when tomorrow came, he would just let me be. I started to avoid the hall. I'd rather be late for class and go the long way around the school just to avoid this ass. He'd poke his friends when I'd walk by. "There goes the beast," he'd say. I'd pretend I had not heard him as his friends all looked my way. Then one night, toward the end of May, a tragedy hit our town. 2 girls were killed in a deadly crash. Our school turned upside down. In the hallway, students clung in disbelief as they cried. I'm sorry to say, the sister of the bully was one who died. When the bully finally returned to school, he was a different guy. Gone was the smirk across his face. He shrunk when he walked by. As he approached, he no longer had that confident, cocky swagger. Instead, he looked so very lost. His footsteps would stumble and stagger. Then one day in the hallway, our gazes met at last. I'm sorry for your loss, I whispered, quietly as I passed. He nodded to me, a silent thanks. No further words were spoken. The pain he felt was palpable. He really seemed quite broken. From that day on, no longer did he set his sights on me. The beast, nickname he penned me, was no longer meant to be. Now, looking back years later, I wonder what I did to have been given such a hateful name from this troubled, insecure kid. I know I did not deserve his scorn, but then, to be fair, he didn't deserve the loss he got, and I know I can't compare. But one hurt doesn't erase the other. You can't undo the pain. Although obtained in different ways, the scars, they still remain. So that was the story of the bully. And like I mentioned, what happened to the bully's family with his sister being killed in that car accident rocked our school. And I remember when I heard the news, and you have that bit of, was that karma at play? And I knew that it wasn't karma. Karma is probably pretty evil, right? But maybe not that evil. But I am human, and I had suffered a lot at the hands of this person. So I will admit, and maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I'm going to admit it because I'm human. I did feel a bit of relief, because I knew that I was no longer going to be his victim. I knew that probably picking on me was no longer on the top of his mind. He had other issues to deal with. And I remember almost feeling like, I can walk through the halls without being picked on. And speaking of walking through the halls, when I encountered the bully that day, oddly enough, and I don't remember the circumstances why this happened, but he and I were the only people in the hallway going in opposite directions. And normally when that would happen, I would have turned and bolted and gone the other way. But uh, I felt like I had taken some power back in a weird way, because he was so shrunken down by this tragedy that had befallen him. And I realized then that I had an opportunity. I could use this as a growth moment, and I could reach out and I could extend my sympathies, which is what I ended up doing. And when he saw me approach, he kind of looked down, like toward the, like a little side eye toward the floor, like he was a little bit ashamed. And then I just whispered those words, "I'm sorry for your loss." And our gazes met, and he kind of gave me a little bit of a nod. And it's almost like we reached a bit of an understanding. Two hurt people for different reasons, but hurt nonetheless. And maybe we had forged a new, I'm not going to say bond, but a new beginning, if you will. And so again, I took this as a growth opportunity. I took it for a chance for me. We can't respond, or we can't help how people would treat us in life, right? All we can help is how we respond to it and how we react to it, and how we use those opportunities to help maybe make ourselves a better person, to help ourselves grow and shape our character. And I think that is one of the first steps in shaping who we are going to become in the future, is when we are presented with these opportunities, and how do we react and how do we respond to them. And so maybe bullying awareness, the October 9th, or the October 9th or October 2nd, National Bullying Awareness Day. Yes, it's about bringing awareness to bullying and how it needs to stop. But maybe it's also awareness of the victims and how we choose. Sorry, getting a little choked up here. How we choose to respond to these situations when they happen to us. And so maybe there's somebody in your life that's being bullied right now. And again, my story has a little bit of a different ending than the typical bullying story. And not every bullying story is going to end this tragically, nor would I want it to. But I hope that if there is somebody that that's being bullied, maybe share this video with them, maybe let them know that that it will end at some point, and they will regain their strength and their power, and they're not the ones that have to be ashamed of their behavior. They're not the ones that are doing anything wrong. They're not the ones that need to hang their head in shame. They need to find their power. And I know that's easier said than done, right? We would all love to be able to stand up to a bully, but most of us can't, especially at a very young age. I was a little bit older when this happened to me. And that's the other thing too. As we grow and we develop a little bit of a tougher skin, if somebody said that to me now, if somebody called me that, I'd have a few choice words for them back, probably with one or two middle fingers up in the air. And I would not let them treat me that way. But that's something that does come with age, and that's part of the storytelling that we have to do as we're older. That's something that you build that character, you build that strength, you build that little bit of a tougher skin. And for those that are being bullied right now, just find your power, find your strength, know that it will end at some point and life will get better. And even though I had this experience, I'm not only surviving, I'm thriving. Life is good. I'm an author. I have a good life, and that is in the cards for other people as well, just to come through this stronger because this happened to you. And it doesn't seem like it right now, right? But in the future, I hope that there's a brighter ending than what I had. And I do pray that this bullying does come to an end. So with that, thank you for listening to my story. Again, very raw, very personal story. I hope that if you liked it, that you will like it and share I think bullying is something so many of us can relate to. If you want to head over to my blog at thepracticalpoet.com/blog, you can find the printed version of The Bully along with just a little bit more of my backstory. And then you can also find links to my books. The Bully is featured in Scatter Seeds of Kindness. And I hope that you'll join me every week for a little storytelling. Next week, I plan on talking about butterflies and hummingbirds and how they brought me peace and comfort during my mom's final days on Earth. And I hope that you will tune into that. And I really thank you for watching and have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.